So, come in and join us on thedustyfeet.com because this is a place where we can safely explore the endless ways of God and the interconnection of His creation, where belief understandings, they may be challenged, divine misunderstandings, they may exist, and traditional teachings, they just might falter as we pursue connection, context, and community with God and each other here in an environment of grace and love. So, feel free to journey around the space. Explore. We have many different topics for discussion. Outside the class, Sons of the Father, the Bible Project, Aleph Beta, Follow the Red String, and more. Lend your ear and then lend your voice. Join a conversation. Start a conversation. Ask questions. Because on this journey, you're probably around folks that just might be pondering the same thing. Community that can build and connect. So come in and join us. And welcome to The Dusty Feet. Good evening. It's April 13th, 2023. Tonight, I'll be introducing you to, for those that already know her, Dr. Carmen Imes. Here on the Dusty Feet, we first heard of Carmen Imes when we were in the study on the test of Abraham in our Bible Project series with the Branches on the Vine, the Bible Project, 2 takes on the test at Mount Sinai. Remember on that podcast they had Tim Mackie, John Collins, and Carmen Imes. Yeah. You know, often when folks begin a walk that involves Torah, many jump in the deep end. Nothing wrong with that. That's how I started. Yet, there are many, many others who are wading in, beginning to be aware and challenge many of the paradigm assumptions that many of us have had, especially about the Torah. I'm not saying that Carmen is waiting. I'm saying that those that listen and even take her classes in college, they are hearing things that they probably never heard growing up. With that in mind, I want to take the time to introduce you to Carmen and learn of another resource for research and study. So hopefully we'll enjoy this episode with her on the Dusty Feet. In the description below are links to all of the audio, video, and source documents that we use here in the Dusty Feet. We want to make sure that any material we use here is properly credited to those folks who work so hard to bring it to us. Without their efforts, the learning we do here does not happen. And remember on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and click that bell icon if you want a reminder. So, as we've done here before, much of tonight's time will be deferred to Carmen Imes. The first video is her introduction to her teaching series, hence the title Torah Tuesday. She gives an introduction to herself and why she's doing Torah Tuesday. The second video is her reboot of the Torah Tuesday series, and I know what it's like to start, stop, and restart something, having actually done that here on the Dusty Feet. You know what's also valuable are the resources that she mentions in both videos. there's more scholars and texts out there that we can learn from and be challenged by, right? Sometimes I think folks feel no matter where they might be on a Torah awareness journey walk, that they are at times isolated, maybe alone, or at least maybe just a few. And at times, social media, that doesn't really help us. Actually, I'm not really surprised there. But, I do believe that there are more and more folks out there that are learning and having their paradigm stretched and explored. Like we say here in the Dusty Feet, where belief understandings may be challenged and divine misunderstandings may exist in traditional teachings, they just might falter. With that, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Carmen Joy Imes. Enjoy.
Welcome to the first ever Torah Tuesday. We're sitting in my office at Prairie College in Three Hills, Alberta, where I am professor of Old Testament, and this is where I get to spend my days studying the Bible and finding ways to communicate it both in writing and in the classroom. I totally love my job. I often call it the best job in the world, and I have been diving deep into the book of Exodus. The reason is because I'm writing a commentary for Baker Academic in their Baker Commentary on the Old Testament Pentateuch series on the book of Exodus. So you might be familiar with John Goldingay's work on the Psalms. He's also writing the Genesis commentary for that series, and I'm writing the Exodus commentary. But here's the problem. It's not going to be out until like 2025. And I'm learning really cool stuff every day as I work on the commentary, and I don't want to have to wait until 2025 to share it with you. So I've started this Torah Tuesday so that you can join me in learning from the Torah along the way. Before we dive in, for those who are not familiar with me, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the work that I already have out there that you don't have to wait until 2025 to read. So I did my dissertation at Wheaton College, and I studied the command not to take the Lord's name in vain, and that's been published as Bearing Yahweh's Name at Sinai by Penn State University Press. That came out in 2018. Just before that, I released this Illustrated Exodus in Hebrew, which contains the entire Hebrew text of Exodus, along with these really beautiful illustrations by Keith Neely, and my translation in English at the bottom of the page. So if you want to dive into the Torah and you're interested in starting with Exodus, that's a really fun resource for those who are learning Hebrew. Most people would probably know me for this book that was released in 2019, Bearing God's Name, Why Sinai Still Matters. This is put out by InterVarsity Press. And this book traces the theme of bearing God's name through the entire Bible, but it spends a lot of time at Sinai. It's a representation of the things that I learned when I did my doctorate. And so it's got this is the research behind it, but it's represented, re-expressed for non-scholars, for the church at large. I'm working on 2 more projects right now that relate to the Torah. So the first is the Exodus commentary that I already mentioned, and the second is a companion volume to this book on being God's image. It's going to focus on the early chapters of Genesis and then trace the theme of being God's image through the entire Bible as well. So I'm in the Torah every day, one way or another, for one project or another, and learning so much and excited to share it with you. So today I'll just start with one insight that you might not notice if you're reading your Bibles in English. You would miss this. The very first verse of Exodus 1 begins with the word and. And these are the names of the sons of Israel. So what's the significance of that? The author is telling us right out of the gate that this book is connected to Genesis, that Exodus is not a standalone story, but that it continues the narrative that was begun in Genesis. And we see this in lots of ways as the Exodus narrative is connecting back using the same key themes and key words and carrying forward the storyline. So here's one example. In Exodus 1, verse 7, it reads this: "But as for the sons of Israel, they were fruitful and swarmed, and they multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so the earth was filled with them." If you're familiar with Genesis chapter 1, you'd recognize that language from the creation mandate, where God tells the humans what their job is after he's created them. He says, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it." So same key words there: the fruitful, multiply, earth filling the earth. All is repeated, plus the word swarmed, which is the word that's used in Genesis 1:20 and 21 to describe what the fish and the birds are going to do as they multiply. They're going to swarm. So right off the bat, we see that this story is fulfilling what God had designed in Genesis for humanity to do. However, there's a problem, because in Exodus chapter 1, God's creation design is inverted. There are lots and lots of Israelites, good, but they're supposed to be filling the earth and subduing it. And instead, they are being subdued by the oppressive rule of the Egyptian system. So there's a problem in the fulfillment of the creation mandate, and we can see that God will step in and do something about this problem as the story unfolds. So that's our tidbit for today. Check back again next week for a new video. And if you liked this one, share it with a friend, like and subscribe so you make sure you don't miss any in the future. Thanks for joining me. Hi everybody, it gives me great joy to welcome you back at long last for another Torah Tuesday. It's been a whole year since I released my last video, and in that time we've moved from Three Hills, Alberta, where I was teaching Old Testament at Prairie College, down to Southern California, where I'm teaching Old Testament at Biola University. It's been a whirlwind of a year. We've moved twice, we bought a house, we're in the middle of remodeling, gotten our son settled in a new school, and I've been teaching classes. I've had hundreds of students this year in the classes that I've taught here at Biola, and it's been a wonderful opportunity to get to know them. I'm teaching Old Testament history and literature, as well as Psalms, and this year I also got to teach biblical interpretation and spiritual formation. This has been a wonderful community in which to do my work and in which to grow and keep learning as a scholar and as a teacher. I'm so glad to be here. And I'm so glad for all of you who are checking out this video. If you're new to Torah Tuesday and you haven't seen one of these videos before, you can check out my YouTube channel, where a whole year's worth of videos are posted on Genesis, on Exodus, on Leviticus, and even a few on the Psalms. This year, we're going to be diving back into the book of Exodus because I'm working again on my Exodus commentary. I'm writing the Exodus volume for this series, the Baker commentary on the Old Testament series. John Goldingay did the one on Genesis, and I'm picking up with Exodus. And I'm working in chapter 6, but we have some catch up to do. The last video that I released was in chapter 3. So in the coming months, I hope to show you some of the wonderful things that I've discovered in chapters 4 and 5 and 6. We'll be sharing a tidbit every Tuesday. That's why this is Torah Tuesday. And if you have friends that you think would enjoy learning along with us, we would love for you to let them know about this. Many of you are aware that my husband, Daniel Imes, was the producer for Torah Tuesday up in Canada. Our life situation has changed and he's working now. And so I'm really happy to announce that I found a new producer. Ethan Montgomery is going to be producing these videos. He is a cinema and media arts student here at Biola University, and he's agreed to work on these videos. Liam Greenlee created the new music for this season of Torah Tuesday, and Biola was gracious to create some new graphics for me to give this a fresh look. I am so excited to dive in. In the year that I have not been making videos, I've been very busy with other projects. I have written Exodus study notes for a new women's study Bible coming out with Lifeway. Also finished the manuscript of my next book with InterVarsity Press called Being God's Image, Why Creation Still Matters. It's a companion volume to Bearing God's Name, Why Sinai Still Matters, that many of you are already aware of and have read. I've also been on a whole bunch of podcasts and spoken in various places. So if you poke around my YouTube channel, you'll find playlists with other chapel messages, interviews that I've done. This year, I've been on the Disciple Dojo podcast, talking with James Michael Smith. I've been on the Bible Project, talking with Tim Mackie and John Collins. I've been on Uncommon Pursuit, talking with Carson Whitenauer, and also the Christ and Culture podcast, the Jude 3 podcast with Lisa Fields, Context Matters with Cindy Parker, Radically Normal, First Century Youth Ministry, The Innkeepers. It's been a great year getting to know a lot of great people who are like-minded and who want to help people discover the riches of the Old Testament. Such a joy. I am honored to have you with me as we learn to read Scripture more closely and respond more faithfully. Tell your friends and check back next Tuesday for our very first video in this new season. Welcome back.
I thought it would be nice to have you to get to know her a bit with her own introduction, right? For her, I enjoyed her perspective and her thoughts on the episode that we did on Two Takes on the Test of Mount Sinai. And, like her, I was compelled by the arguments about the events. The links are in the description below to those two-part episodes that we did, okay? These episodes that she does on Torah Tuesday are usually fairly brief, right? They're only about 5 to 10 minutes. In many of the episodes, they cover things that you probably might not have realized or considered before. Especially since the Hebrew text will often reveal things that are missed in our English translations. So with the last video, I want you to hear one of her Torah Tuesday videos. And I suspect that I will be using a few of these for discussions here on the Dusty Feet in the future. Enjoy Torah Tuesday video.
Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. Last week we began to talk about the passage in Exodus 7 verse 3 where Yahweh announces that he's going to harden Pharaoh's heart. I introduced the 3 Hebrew words that are used to describe what happens to Pharaoh's heart in these narratives, and I told you that they do not all mean the same thing. So this week we're going to look at who is doing the hardening or strengthening or making heavy of Pharaoh's heart. So who is the actor? And then what does it mean to have a heavy heart? I've already indicated that to have a hard heart or a strong heart means that you're resolute and will finish what you set out to do. But what does it mean to have a heavy heart in Egyptian thinking? So the first question to answer is who's doing the acting? The 3 Hebrew words that I introduced last week occur many times throughout these narratives, but interestingly, they're in a somewhat of a pattern. So, and you can see this from the Bible Project video on Exodus. They have a simplified version of what I'm about to share, but I'm going to give a little bit more nuance and detail. So in the first 6 signs and wonders, Pharaoh is the one doing the action, and his heart either becomes strong or heavy, but it's based on his own choice. So beginning with the staff turning into snake, and all the way through the plague against the cattle, which actually is called a plague in Hebrew. Each time, in each narrative, there's an indication that Pharaoh's heart has either become strong or heavy, and it's his own doing. It's not until we get to the second set of 6 signs and wonders that we get God doing the action. So Yahweh makes Pharaoh's heart strong in the sign of the boils.
In the darkness, Yahweh makes Pharaoh's heart strong, and the locust, the death of the firstborn. So almost exclusively in those signs and wonders, it's Yahweh doing the acting, and he's making Pharaoh's heart strong rather than heavy. There's one exception to that in chapter 10, verse 1, where Yahweh makes the heart of Pharaoh and his servants heavy. But this could be a telescoping, talking about the effect of having made his heart hard. It results in a heavy heart. Most of the time, Pharaoh's the one making his heart heavy. Yahweh is the one making his heart strong. I think this is interesting because the idea of strengthening someone's heart doesn't seem as ethically problematic. Yahweh is basically egging Pharaoh on and encouraging him to finish what he's started. So Pharaoh has set out to refuse to let the people go, and Yahweh eggs him on. He says, come on, let's have a fair fight. Stick with me to the end. And it's only Pharaoh himself who is making his heart heavy, which is a different idiom that we need to explore. As I mentioned last week, to have a heavy heart in English means to be discouraged or to be sad about something. But that's not what it means in Hebrew or in the Egyptian context. So there are two main possibilities of what could be meant by the idea of a heavy heart. The first is that this could be a way of just saying that his organ is non-functional. From a Hebrew point of view, the heart is the thinker as well as the feeler, and it's the decider of a person. So we think of thinking with our heads or making decisions with our heads, with our brain, and our heart feels something. The Hebrews had no concept of anything happening up here. They had no idea what to do with the brain, and the Egyptians didn't either. They just, when somebody's body was preserved and mummified, they would just pull the brains out because they didn't think there was anything special about it, but they would carefully preserve the heart. So this gray mushy stuff up here, they didn't know what it was for. But the heart is where thinking, feeling, and deciding happens. So it's possible that a heavy heart would just indicate that it's non-functioning. We see something like this in Isaiah chapter 6, when Isaiah is supposed to preach to the people so that their ears become heavy, so their ears would be non-functioning, so they could not hear. I don't find this fully persuasive in the case of Pharaoh's heart, that this describes it as non-functioning, because Pharaoh seems to be freely deciding and freely thinking and freely feeling. We have plenty of emotion, plenty of thoughts, plenty of will. It's not as though Pharaoh is disengaged or numb. He's quite involved in this showdown. So the second possibility of a heavy heart is that it's guilty of injustice. And here's where we learn about this. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, which has been widely read. There's lots of different versions of the Book of the Dead that's available. People would have the Book of the Dead customized for them, for their burials. They would choose particular spells and particular scenes to include. But what they have in common is that the idea that after death, the person is led through the underworld by the gods, and they're tested to see whether their life had merit. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, there's a pair of scales to weigh a person's heart. And so you can see this in the picture posted here. The dead person's heart is removed and placed on one end of the scales, and on the other end of the scales is placed a feather, and the feather represents Ma'at, which is the Egyptian concept of order, harmony, truth, morality, justice, like all is right and balanced in the world. All is as it should be. And it's the job of every Egyptian, and especially the job of Pharaoh, to maintain Ma'at. So if your heart is put on the scales against Ma'at and found heavy, it means you're guilty of disrupting Ma'at or committing injustice and disrupting society. If it's lighter than the feather that represents Ma'at, then it means that you're good to go. So for Pharaoh to make his own heart heavy is to indicate, from an Egyptian point of view, that Pharaoh is guilty of injustice, that he rather than maintaining Ma'at for his realm, he is disrupting it. He's causing disorder, and he's oppressing the people. His enslavement of the Israelite people, his exploitation of their labor shows that he's guilty of injustice. And so again and again, his refusal to listen to Yahweh is characterized as causing his heart to become heavy. So we need to do this cultural work to see what does this idiom even mean. And in an Egyptian context, it clearly communicates that Pharaoh's guilty. So Pharaoh makes his own heart guilty while God makes his heart strong. This, I think, is really helpful in trying to wrestle with what is going on here. God is not forcing Pharaoh to do something he did not freely choose. Pharaoh is freely choosing to refuse to listen to Yahweh and refuse to capitulate to his demands. And by doing so, he's making his heart heavy. Yahweh, in turn, is egging Pharaoh on, saying, all right, hey, what are we in? Are we in it to the end? Are we in a fair fight here? Let's keep going. I want to show you all of who I am, and you haven't seen it all yet. So there we have on the one hand this sort of gracious increase in intensity to each of the signs and wonders. The early signs and wonders are not dangerous to human life. They're just an annoyance. But as time goes on, they become more and more dangerous. Pharaoh unveils his own commitment to maintaining his power at the expense of his people and their livelihood and their very lives. And so he's showing himself by Egyptian standards to be a terrible ruler. And God is showing himself to be superior to Pharaoh's power and to his authority. So I hope this has been helpful. We are going to be spending quite some time reading through the signs and wonders together. We'll work through them carefully, and I hope to show you lots of cool literary patterns that emerge when we read these texts closely, and I hope that you'll see how much it unveils the majesty of God, who is showing his character through these actions in the chapters to come. Have a great week.
You know, I really enjoy the nuances of the Hebrew language, right? And how the development of the text, the context they belong to, the changes of the words that English, probably more often than we care to admit, it misses. And then our paradigms, that might lead us down a path that then might need to be reviewed. Those patterns she talked about, there's our patterning that we see, and we talk about a lot here on the Dusty Feet, that we see these repetitive things. And you'll hear with Carmen in her series, you will hear that many, many, many times. We hear on Bible Project, on Carmen, and it's all over Aleph Beta with Rabbi David Foreman and the Dusty Feet. Yeah? But my hope and my prayer is that our hearts never come to the fullness that Pharaoh's does. Yeah, may it never. Okay, our point to ponder. And this point to ponder, I wrote this, but it was something that came to me and made me think. I said, one of my greatest concerns is, too often, we isolate when we encounter difference. Rather, maybe we can consider sitting at the table with those that challenge us. Maybe we can find there is more to be experienced when our dreams come together. And maybe breaking bread is a good place to start. That's why I enjoy these authors, these various authors I listen to with Skip Moen, Rabbi David Foreman, Tim Mackie, Carmen Imes. Sit down at the table, break bread. And thanks for with us tonight, another edition of the Dusty Feet.